The skies above occupied France on April 8, 1943, were a meticulously maintained German domain, patrolled by the battle-hardened veterans of the Jagdgeschwader, JG fighter wings. For years, the Luftwaffe had honed its tactical superiority against the British Spitfires, balancing the speed of the Messerschmitt Bf 109 with the rugged power of the Focke-Wulf 190. They viewed the arrival of the Americans as inevitable, yet expected a certain level of sophistication. Instead, they were greeted by the bizarre sight of the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. At 27,000 feet over the Normandy town of Caen, the air was a biting, crystalline blue, providing perfect visibility for Oberleutnant Rolf Hermsichen, a 26-year-old veteran ace of JG-26. The clear canopy of his Focke-Wulf 190 A5 offered an unobstructed view of the approaching American formation. Hermsichen's seasoned eyes, accustomed to the elegant, deadly silhouettes of the Spitfire and the nimble Eastern Front fighters, narrowed in disbelief. Climbing laboriously toward the German formation were 16 silhouettes that defied conventional fighters' aesthetics. They were massive, almost corpulent, struggling to maintain altitude. Hermsichen, unable to stifle his mirth, transmitted a message to his wingman that quickly spread through the German ranks. "The Yanks have sent us flying milk bottles." His laughter was genuine, echoing the collective derision of the entire Luftwaffe fighter arm. The P-47s seemed comical in their design, a barrel-shaped fuselage necessary to house the massive radial engine and complex supercharger, topped by a vast bubble-like canopy. Their wings seemed disproportionately small for their enormous 7-ton weight, and the propellers dwarfed anything in the German inventory. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp engines strained audibly against the Thunderbolt's bulk, pushing the machines upwards like heavy, reluctant whales. This combat debut over-occupied Europe, a theater where the Germans had fought continuously since 1939, placed an untested, radical machine against the most experienced fighter force in the world. The 56 American pilots spread across the French sky that morning were novices in their first combat sortie, facing veterans of multiple campaigns who had refined their tactics in the crucible of war. What Hermsichen could not possibly know was the true strategic meaning of that massive, ungraceful silhouette. He saw an inefficient, heavy fighter. He failed to grasp that he was witnessing the arrival of a weapon designed not for elegance, but for systematic destruction. The core philosophy of the P-47 was a direct reflection of American industrial logic to overwhelm and outlast, sacrificing traditional agility for mass, altitude power, and, critically, firepower. That immense thickling was loaded with the ultimate argument in an aerial war of attrition: 8 50-caliber Browning machine guns. This meant the P-47 carried 3,400 rounds of ammunition, a volume that translated to a combined rate of fire of over 6,000 rounds per minute. In a concentrated burst, that level of synchronized firepower was sufficient to utterly shred a Messerschmitt or a Focke-Wulf in under 2 seconds. The German pilots, relying on superior handling and limited cannon ammunition, could not conceive of the sheer, sustained kinetic energy the American machine could unleash. The laughter echoing in the German cockpits on that April morning was the sound of tactical brilliance making a fatal miscalculation against industrial power. The Americans had arrived with a fighter built not merely to engage, but to survive and annihilate.
The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt was born not of graceful iteration, but of immediate panic and radical necessity. Its lineage traced back to the dark summer of June 1940, as German blitzkrieg tanks rolled across France and Luftwaffe fighters secured complete air superiority. The urgency felt by the United States Army Air Corps was palpable, prompting them to issue specifications for a high-altitude interceptor capable of matching or exceeding the capabilities of the vaunted German machines. The specifications were a wish list of impossible performance characteristics: high speed, high climb rate, and superior high-altitude performance. The designer tasked with meeting these demands was Alexander Kartveli, a Georgian-born aviation visionary and Republic Aviation's chief designer. Kartveli and his team quickly realized that conventional design philosophies, those favoring lightweight structures and small engines, like the one that birthed the previous P-43 Lancer, would be inadequate. The only way to achieve the required speed and altitude performance was through brute force, an engine of unprecedented power mated to the most complex supercharging system yet devised. Kartveli admitted his design would be a behemoth, telling his team, "It will be a dinosaur, but it will be a dinosaur with good proportions." The resulting aircraft was the XP-47B prototype, which first flew on May 6, 1941. It was a physical shock to everyone who saw it. At 9,900 pounds empty, it weighed a staggering 65% more than its P-43 predecessor. It was easily the heaviest single-engine fighter ever conceived. Test pilots universally posed the same question upon first approach: this thing actually flies? The heart of the beast was the Pratt & Whitney R2880 Double Wasp, a colossal 18-cylinder radial engine capable of producing an initial 2,000 horsepower, later boosted to over 2,800 horsepower with water methanol injection. This engine was a monument to American manufacturing precision, containing over 2,400 individual components machined to tolerances of 1,000th of an inch. However, the key to the Thunderbolt's strategic value was not the engine itself, but the complex turbo supercharger system designed to feed it. To maintain rated power in the thin air of the stratosphere above 25,000 feet, the engine needed highly compressed air. This was achieved by ducting exhaust gases through a massive turbine located in the extreme rear of the fuselage, a feature that gave the P-47 its distinctive, almost pregnant appearance. The compressed air was then cooled and ducted forward through a complex network of piping running the length of the fuselage back to the engine. This system was technologically revolutionary. German and British fighters rely on single- or two-stage mechanical superchargers, which sapped engine horsepower and saw their performance steeply degrade above 25,000 feet. The P-47's turbo supercharger, powered by waste exhaust gases, delivered sea-level performance at 27,000 feet and can function effectively up to its service ceiling of 42,000 feet, altitudes where German fighters literally choked and grasped for thin air. The consequence of this design choice, the massive engine, the robust airframe necessary to handle its torque, the heavy supercharging system, and the sheer volume of armament, was the fighter that was, by European standards, structurally over-engineered and impossibly heavy. The wing spars, for instance, were designed to support over 40,000 pounds, 3 times the aircraft's loaded weight. Every component, from the engine mount designed to withstand 12 G-forces to the control cables doubled throughout with automatic backup systems, was overbuilt. This obsession with structural integrity ensured the P-37's unprecedented ability to withstand combat damage. Kartveli had not designed a fast, elegant duelist. He had designed a fast, powerful, and nearly indestructible heavy slugger.
The transition of the P-47 Thunderbolt from a revolutionary prototype to a reliable combat weapon was a brutal and costly process, initially claiming more American lives than the Luftwaffe ever did. The machine's raw power and unorthodox flight characteristics made its early training period a terrifying gauntlet for the first pilots assigned to it. Major Hubert Zemke, a demanding and highly capable officer, commanded the 56 Fighter Group, the first unit assigned to the Thunderbolt. Zemke's initial assessment of the aircraft was one of deep suspicion and loathing. The P-47 was a killer in the hands of the untrained. Between September 1942 and January 1943, the 56th Fighter Group lost 18 pilots and 41 aircraft in training accidents alone. This attrition rate was shocking, creating a prevailing sense of dread among the young pilots. The inherent design of the aircraft, which made it so potent in combat, created severe handling difficulties during takeoff and landing. The immense torque generated by the 2,000 horsepower radial engine and its huge propeller demanded absolute concentration on takeoff, leading to frequent torque rolls that could flip the plane onto its back if the pilot failed to apply massive counter-rudder in time. On landing, the narrow undercarriage and heavy weight made the aircraft prone to violent ground loops, resulting in catastrophic structural damage and injury. Compounding these issues was the P-47's startling high-speed performance. Pilots diving the heavy aircraft discovered the phenomenon of compressibility, an effect previously encountered only in wind tunnels. As the aircraft approached Mach 0.8, the airflow over the wings accelerated beyond the speed of sound, creating shock waves that effectively froze the controls. Pilots experienced terrifying moments where their controls became unresponsive as the aircraft plunged toward the ground. Many American lives were lost to compressibility before engineers developed modifications to warn pilots and alleviate the effect. Despite the fear and the continuous stream of accidents, the pilots who survived the rigorous training slowly began to recognize the machine's extraordinary latent potential. Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson, a farm boy from Oklahoma, who would become one of the premier aces of the war, described his first flight after mastering the basics. It was like strapping yourself to a locomotive. The power was unbelievable. You didn't fly it, you aimed it. Zemke, through trial and error, realized that the P-47 demanded a completely different approach to flying. Traditional fighter concepts centered on agility. The ability to turn and climb were secondary. The P-47's strength lay in its mass, its high-altitude performance, and its ability to gather energy in a dive that no German fighter could match. The process of turning these novices into effective combat pilots was a brutal re-education, requiring them to abandon years of conventional fighter doctrine and embrace the P-47's unique strengths: speed, altitude, and ruggedness. They were being trained not as dueling fencers, but as heavy-caliber snipers, relying on one devastating pass from above rather than a prolonged knife fight. The high training casualties were the unintended, tragic price of forging the man who would eventually wield the most powerful piston fighter ever mass-produced. They were now ready to confront the enemy. But the enemy was ready to confirm every derogatory thing they had ever heard about the flying milk bottle.
When the P-47s began their first regular combat operations over occupied Europe in April and May 1943, the early results seemed to confirm every prejudice the Luftwaffe held. The initial encounters were a tactical disaster for the Americans, primarily because the novice pilots attempted to fight the Focke-Wulf 190s and Messerschmitt 109s on their terms, engaging in traditional dogfights at medium and low altitudes. In these crucial early weeks, the P-47 was clearly inferior in several key performance metrics. Turning radius. The Thunderbolt's heavy weight and broad wingspan made it slow to turn, allowing the nimble German fighters to easily pull inside its arc and get onto its tail. Low-altitude climb. Below 20,000 feet, the P-47's turbo-supercharger system was less advantageous, and its sheer bulk meant it struggled to match the lighter German fighters in a pure climb. Handling. The P-47's heavy controls made it sluggish and demanding in sustained maneuvering. Luftwaffe pilots quickly recognized it ruthlessly exploited these weaknesses. Their favorite tactic was to attack from below, where the P-47 struggled to respond quickly, or to immediately force a low-altitude turning fight, which inevitably ended in the German pilot's favor. Hauptmann Josef Pips Priller, the commanding officer of JG-26, reported his assessment to headquarters with dismissive confidence after his first encounters. "The new American fighter is meat for the slaughter. It flies like a truck, turns like a freight train, and climbs like a pregnant cow. Our boys are calling them Indiana, fat targets pretending to be warriors." This assessment was widely echoed and reinforced the German belief in their tactical and design superiority. The statistics seem to confirm this confidence. In their first month of operations, the American fighter group suffered heavily, losing 14 Thunderbolts for only 3 confirmed German kills. The kill-to-loss ratio was disastrous. The Royal Air Force, the RAF, observing the heavy losses from their Spitfire squadrons, quietly suggested that the Americans might be wise to reconsider their choice of mount.
Bridge pilots often joked that the best evasive maneuver in a P-47 was to unstrap and run around the roomy cockpit, a jest rooted in the fighter's corpulent appearance. Yet, despite the lopsided early kill ratios, something strange and confusing was happening on the receiving end of combat that German intelligence failed to properly analyze. Luftwaffe pilots were reporting that the P-47s were incredibly difficult to destroy. Aircraft that should have disintegrated under cannon fire continued to fly. The pilots who managed to limp back to English bases brought with him evidence of the P-47's near indestructible construction. One particular aircraft returned from a mission with 21 cannon hulls and well over 100 machine gun strikes. Damage that would have instantly reduced a Bf-109 or FB-190 to falling debris was routinely shrugged off by the Thunderbolt. Its massive, air-cooled radial engine, lacking the vulnerable coolant system so its liquid-cooled rivals, continued to function despite taking hits that would have forced any Messerschmitt to glide immediately. More importantly, when the P-47 pilots managed to get their guns on target, the results were devastatingly final. The sheer density of fire from 8 synchronized .50 caliber machine guns created a zone of destruction unlike anything the German pilots had experienced. Unlike cannon rounds, which required extreme precision, the American heavy machine guns created a solid stream of fire that annihilated anything it touched. The German perception of the P-47 as easy prey was beginning to clash violently with the emerging reality of its structural durability and terrifying concentrated firepower. The initial laughter of the Luftwaffe pilots was about to turn to disbelief and then to terror.
The moment the German laughter died and was replaced by shock and disbelief can be precisely dated to June 26, 1943, over Les Tours, France. The engagement involved Second Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson of the 61st Fighter Squadron and an encounter that would become legendary on both sides of the conflict, directly challenging every established axiom of aerial combat damage tolerance. Johnson's formation of 48 P-47s, while returning from an escort mission, was flawlessly bounced by 16 Focke-Wulf 190s from 2nd Up JG-26. Led by Hauptmann Wilhelm Ferdinand Galland, the younger brother of the famous Adolf Galland. The Germans executed a perfect hit-and-run attack, diving from the sun with a decisive speed advantage. Johnson's Thunderbolt, flying at the rear of the formation, was instantly caught in the crossfire. In the first seconds of combat, the damage was catastrophic. 20mm cannon shells exploded across the aircraft's cockpit area. The canopy shattered, spraying shards of plexiglass. Hydraulic fluid, the lifeblood of the controls, sprayed violently into the cockpit. The engine cowling was torn away, and a fire erupted behind the instrument panel. Johnson, wounded in the nose and leg by shrapnel and bullet fragments, tried desperately to bail out, the standard procedure for such terminal damage. He discovered the canopy was welded shut. A 20mm cannon shell had exploded in the canopy track, fusing the mechanism. He was trapped inside a dying, burning wreck at 27,000 feet. What followed defied all engineering and combat logic. Despite zero forward visibility through the oil-covered windscreen, a violently shaking, barely functioning engine, and controls that responded only intermittently, Johnson managed to level the P-47 and limp toward the English Channel at less than 170 miles per hour. The Thunderbolt continued flying with damage that would have disintegrated any Allied or Axis fighter into falling debris. Then the situation became worse. A lone Focke-Wulf 190 from JG-26 discovered the crippled Thunderbolt dragging itself home. The German pilot, confident in the kill, positioned himself behind Johnson's aircraft and opened fire with his 4 20mm cannons and 2 13mm machine guns. Johnson, unable to evade, could only huddle behind his armored seat plate and pray. The Thunderbolt absorbed the Germans' entire cannon ammunition load. The Focke-Wulf pilot, astonished, repositioned and fired again, this time only with his machine guns, his cannon ammunition exhausted. Still, the P-47 flew. The German then pulled alongside, staring in utter disbelief at the flying wreck.
Johnson clearly saw the pilot's young, blonde face, his expression shifting from confident hunting to confusion, and finally to something approaching fear. The German pilot emptied his remaining machine gun ammunition into the Thunderbolt. When the American machine still stubbornly held its course, the German shook his head in amazement, gave a final informal salute, and peeled away, unable to fathom how to finish the kill. Johnson's P-47 crash-landed at Manston, the engine failing right on the runway. The crew chief stopped counting bullet holes after reaching 200. Engineers discovered a cannon shell had exploded inches from Johnson's head, and another had detonated against the thick armored plate behind his seat. The control cables were partially severed, and 3 of the 4 main longerons, the structural backbone of the fuselage, were shot clean through. The survival of Johnson's aircraft sent shockwaves through both air forces. German intelligence initially dismissed the combat reports as impossible, but testimony from multiple pilots confirmed the event. American engineers studying the wreckage realized they had built a machine far more durable than they had intended. The P-47 had survived everything the Luftwaffe's best fighter could deliver. The joke was over. The flying milk bottle had revealed itself to be a flying fortress. The legendary survival of Robert Johnson in June 1943 was the definitive piece of evidence needed to change American tactics. Major Hubert Zemke, the once skeptical commander of the 56th Fighter Group, had learned the secret of the P-47 through brutal trial and error. The aircraft's disadvantages could be entirely negated by exploiting its single, overwhelming advantage, its speed and weight in a dive. Zemke instilled a radical new doctrine into his pilots. Don't turn with them. Don't climb with them at low altitude. Use your weight. Use your power. Use your guns. This approach became formalized as the boom and zoom tactic, though pilots often referred to their missions as the Thunderbolt turkey shoot. The strategy was simple, devastating, and tailored precisely to American technological superiority. High-altitude advantage. P-47 formations would use their turbo superchargers to climb to 30,000 feet or higher, altitudes where German fighters struggled and where American visibility was best. Energy conversion. When Luftwaffe formations appeared below, the Thunderbolts would immediately roll inverted and dive toward the enemy. The massive weight of the P-47, combined with its streamlined design, allowed it to accelerate to speeds of 550 miles per hour or more in a vertical descent, faster than any German fighter could achieve, even in its own dive. The strike was a single, high-speed, high-energy pass. The enemy was intercepted at a speed so immense that deflection shooting was virtually impossible for the defending Germans. The P-47 pilot would fire his 8.50 caliber guns in a concentrated burst. Disengagement. After the strike, the P-47 would use the energy gained in the dive to perform a rapid zoom climb back to altitude, or simply continue the dive, pulling away at speeds the German aircraft could not match. This tactic rendered the agility and superior turning performance of the Focke-Wulf 190 completely irrelevant. The Germans relied on the sustained turn fight. The Americans refused to play that game. They were never close enough or slow enough for the German pilots to exploit their advantage. The psychological impact on the German pilots was immense. They went from the hunters to the hunted, constantly forced to look up and defend against attacks that materialized as devastating vertical blurs. Captain Walker, Bud Mather, one of the first American aces in Europe, perfected the technique. He later recalled that the German pilots were never able to hold the advantage for more than a few seconds. The results were immediate and dramatic. The P-47 kill-to-loss ratio surged upward as American pilots mastered the boom and zoom. Aircraft caught in the convergence pattern didn't merely fall, they were vaporized by the sheer volume of lead. The combination of structural durability, allowing the P-47 to disengage after taking hits, and devastating firepower, guaranteeing destruction when the P-47 hit, proved to be an irresistible force against an aircraft arm built on the philosophy of fragile, lightweight performance. The P-47 had evolved from a laughingstock into a high-speed, high-altitude weapon, setting the stage for the definitive test of American industrial might deep inside Germany.
The true strategic test of the P-47's newfound combat effectiveness came during the massive U.S. 8th Air Force raids deep into Germany. The most significant of these was the August 17, 1943 dual mission targeting the ball-bearing plants at Schweinfurt and the aircraft factory at Regensburg. This mission demanded the deepest penetration into German airspace yet attempted, stretching the P-47's range, even with external drop tanks, to its absolute limit. It was an operation that simultaneously exposed the P-47's lingering limitations, its range, and showcased its terrifying, matured effectiveness, its firepower. The Thunderbolts, specifically tasked with protecting the heavy B-17 bombers from relentless German interceptors, played a critical but frustrating role on this day. Due to range limitations, the P-47s could only escort the bombers to the penetration point, leaving them exposed for the most brutal part of the mission. However, on their outbound leg, they encountered the Luftwaffe's most feared assets, the specialized bomber killers. Major David Schilling, leading the 62nd Fighter Squadron, intercepted a formation of Messerschmitt Me-110's destroyer aircraft, positioning for their attack. These twin-engine German fighters, heavily armed with cannon and rockets, were built specifically to shatter bomber formations. Though potent, the Me-110s were less maneuverable than single-engine fighters. Schilling's flight of 4 Thunderbolts immediately rolled into their attack dive from 28,000 feet. The German formation, built to absorb incoming machine gun fire from bombers, was utterly unprepared for the concentrated devastation of the P-47. Unteroffizier Roth, a gunner in one of the Me-110s who survived the encounter, later recounted his trauma during interrogation. Quote, "The American fighters came down like hammers from heaven. I opened fire at 800 meters. Good hits. I saw them strike the fighter's wing. The P-47 didn't even wobble. Then he fired. The aircraft ahead of us simply came apart. Not shot down, destroyed. Wings separated from fuselage, tail severed. The crew compartment shredded into metal confetti. In 2 seconds, a 110 became nothing." Unquote. This testimonial perfectly encapsulated the P-47's destructive power. 8 Messerschmitt Me-110s and 109s were destroyed in less than a minute. The German pilots had never encountered such a high concentration of projectiles. The technical specifications proved the point. Total rounds, each P-47 carried 3,400 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition, weighing nearly 900 pounds. Sustained fire. Unlike German 20mm cannon, which were limited to 120 to 200 rounds total, the P-47 could maintain fire for over half a minute. Convergence. At the typical convergence distance of 300 yards, the ballistic paths of all 8 guns intersected in a zone roughly 6 feet in diameter. Anything within that zone faced 100 projectiles per second, each traveling at 2,900 feet per second. The ammunition itself was a product of American industrial might. The standard load mixed armor-piercing incendiary, API, armor-piercing incendiary tracer, APIT, and standard ball ammunition in a pattern designed to both shatter and ignite. Lieutenant Colonel Francis Gabby Gabreski, who became America's top ace in Europe, summarized the effect. Quote, "When you hit them with all 8, they don't just go down, they explode. I saw 109 literally cut in half. The pilot never knew what hit him." Unquote. The Schweinfurt raid proved that the P-47 was no longer a duelist, it was an annihilation machine, designed to destroy its opponent instantaneously through the sheer force of applied ballistics. The American daylight bombing campaign, though costly, would continue, now protected by an escort capable of delivering overwhelming, immediate destruction. By late 1943, the P-47 had cemented its reputation as a formidable high-altitude weapon, exploiting the vast performance gulf created by its turbo-supercharger. This technical advantage was not only killing average German pilots, but it was reaching up to neutralize the Luftwaffe's elite. The contrast in altitude performance was definitive. The P-47, using exhaust gases to compress its air intake, maintained its rated power output up to 30,000 feet. German fighters like the Focke-Wulf 190A6, relying on single-stage mechanical superchargers, saw their performance degrade significantly above 25,000 feet, turning them into sluggish, non-responsive machines in the thin air where the Americans operated with ease. This lethal reality claimed the life of one of Germany's most successful aviators on October 8, 1943. Oberleutnant Hans Philipp, an ace with an astonishing 206 victories and a veteran of over 500 missions on both fronts, encountered this physics lesson fatally. Leading Jagdgewehr item against a B-17 formation at 28,000 feet over Bremen, Philipp found his Focke-Wulf 190 unresponsive. He was flying 6 miles above the Earth, where his powerful BMW 801 engine was desperately gasping for oxygen. P-47s of the 56th Fighter Group, diving from their 32,000-foot perch, found the German formation sitting ducks. Robert Johnson, now an experienced ace, spotted Philipp's distinctive Focke-Wulf. Johnson's combat report was chillingly clinical. Opened fire at 300 yards, 30 degrees deflection. Observed strikes along entire fuselage. Enemy aircraft exploded. No parachute observed. Philipp's death sent shockwaves through the Luftwaffe. If their best, most durable veteran could not survive an encounter against the Thunderbolts at high altitude, what chance did the average pilot have? The German High Command, rattled, immediately ordered an investigation. The report delivered to Goering in November 1943 was utterly sobering. The P-47's service ceiling exceeded 42,000 feet. Its dive speed approached the speed of sound, and its armor allowed it to absorb damage that would destroy 3 conventional German fighters. The final piece of the puzzle, addressing the P-47's lingering weaknesses, arrived in January 1944 with the new P-47 D-22 variant. This model featured the Hamilton Standard hydromatic propeller with paddle blades, a gargantuan propeller 13 feet in diameter. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Climb rate, the standard Thunderbolt's anemic climb rate of 2,200 feet per minute at sea level surged to over 3,000 feet per minute, matching or exceeding German fighters at most altitudes. Acceleration. The new propeller improved acceleration, allowing the heavy P-47 to build energy faster in level flight. The paddle blade propeller did more than just improve performance, it changed the very sound of the aircraft. The blade tips, reaching supersonic speeds, created a low, distinctive thundering roar that could be heard from miles, the Donnerschlag. German pilots and ground troops could now identify the approaching P-47s by sound alone, a deep, threatening rumble that meant death was imminent. Hauptmann Heinz Kuhnke, a veteran with over 200 combat missions, encountered the new variants in February 1944. He wrote in his diary, "The fat American fighters have learned to climb. We bounced a formation near Hanover, expecting our usual advantage. They turned into us and climbed with us. When we tried to disengage, they followed us up to 30,000 feet. Schmidt was clocked and blown apart. These are not the same machines we laughed at last year." The P-47 was no longer just a high-altitude threat. It was now a competent fighter at all operational altitudes. By the spring of 1944, the P-47 was evolving into a true multi-role monster, capable of escorting bombers deep into the Reich and, critically, transitioning into the most feared ground attack weapon in the German arsenal. The transition began in earnest in April 1944 as the Allies prepared for the invasion of France. The Thunderbolt's massive airframe and rugged construction made it an ideal jabot fighter bomber. Its 8.50 caliber machine guns, already proven devastating against aircraft, were equally effective against ground targets. The standard armor-piercing incendiary ammunition could penetrate the top armor of most German vehicles, while the sheer volume of fire delivered an immense shock. A 2-second burst put 160 half-inch projectiles into a target area the size of a truck. The true transformation came with the addition of ordnance. The P-47 D-25 variant could carry a bomb load equivalent to early war medium bombers, 2 1,000-pound bombs and a 500-pound belly bomb. Later variants added zero-length rocket stubs for 10 5-inch high-velocity aircraft rockets, HVARs, each equal to a 105mm artillery shell. Oberst Hans von Lake, commanding the 125th Panzer Grenadier Regiment during the Normandy campaign, experienced the P-47 ground attacks firsthand. They came in low, so low you could see the pilots' faces. The sound was terrifying, engines roaring, rockets screaming. Then the hammer of those heavy machine guns. A column of our trucks simply ceased to exist. 20 vehicles transformed into burning wreckage in one pass. The psychological effect on the men was devastating. They called them jabots, but these were something beyond that. They were flying artillery with the accuracy of snipers. On June 6, 1944, D-Day, the shift in air superiority became absolute. Over 500 P-47 provided air cover for the invasion, creating an impenetrable umbrella over the beaches. German fighters attempting to break through were massacred at every altitude. Oberlieutenant Wolfgang Fischer of Juggo 12, one of only 3 German pilots to reach the beaches that day, reported that his 12-fighter group was reduced to 1 survivor. The P-47s were waiting at every altitude. You couldn't climb over them, couldn't dive under them. Their guns turned our fighters into aluminum rain. In the weeks following D-Day, P-47s systematically strangled the German logistics. The statistics claimed by the 9th Air Force Thunderbolts in June alone were staggering, showing the complete destruction of the Wehrmacht's ability to maneuver in daylight. Locomotives, 651 destroyed. Trucks, 3,847 destroyed. Tanks and armored vehicles, 512 destroyed. The German army was forced to move only at night, severely hampering its ability to respond to Allied advances. The P-47's combination of speed, armor, and firepower made them nearly unstoppable against both aircraft and ground targets. The P-47 had successfully transformed from a despised defensive fighter into the primary engine of the Allied invasion's logistical success, grinding the German ground forces to a halt.
The P-47 Thunderbolt's ultimate legacy was not just its high kill ratio, but its embodiment of overwhelming American industrial capacity, the true insurmountable factor in the war of attrition. Its success was global, repeating its dominance in the Pacific theater, where its endurance and durability were perfectly suited to the vast distances and harsh conditions. The Japanese, accustomed to fighting nimble but fragile American aircraft, were similarly unprepared for the P-47's resilience. Japanese ace Saburo Sakai, encountering P-47s over New Guinea, later wrote, "We called them monsters. Our 20mm cannon seemed to have no effect. I put dozens of rounds into one Thunderbolt and watched it fly away. Their return fire was terrifying, streams of heavy bullets that tore aircraft apart." The P-47's technological evolution continued with the P-47N variant, designed specifically for the Pacific with wet wings that increased fuel capacity and extended its range to 2,350 miles, allowing it to escort B-29s all the way to Japan. The ultimate measure of the Thunderbolt's quality and its place in history came from its encounters with the German Me-262 jet fighter. Though slower than the jet in level flight,
P-47 pilots successfully developed tactics to catch the jets during their most vulnerable phases: takeoff, landing, and high-speed dives. On November 27, 1944, Lieutenant Colonel John C. Meyer became one of the first pilots to shoot down an Me-262 with a P-47, using a dive to gain sufficient speed. His report noted, "The enemy aircraft disintegrated under fire. The concentrated fire of 8 50-caliber guns proved more effective than we anticipated against jet aircraft." The final decisive blow delivered by American production was during Operation Bodenplatte on January 1, 1945. The Luftwaffe's desperate all-in attempt to destroy Allied air power on the ground. German fighters destroyed 22 P-47s on the ground at one airfield, but Major George Brooking's legendary response captured the strategic reality. When a captured German pilot taunted them, Brooking simply pointed to the factory-fresh replacements already being prepared. "By tomorrow we'll have 40 new ones. How long will it take you to replace your pilots?" The Luftwaffe lost 271 aircraft and 213 irreplaceable pilots. The Americans lost 134 aircraft, all replaced within a week. The numbers told the story of inevitable industrial defeat. The production metrics. Total production. Republic Aviation produced 15,685 P-47s during the war. Production rate. At peak, one Thunderbolt was completed every hour around the clock. Logistics. Each P-47 sortie required 3,400 rounds of ammunition, leading to consumption exceeding 10 million rounds per month. The fuel consumed by the 9th Air Force alone was over 25 million gallons monthly. The pilot gap. By 1944, the U.S. was graduating 30,000 pilots annually, with P-47 pilots receiving a minimum of 400 hours of flight training before combat. German pilots were often entering combat with less than 100 hours total time. The most profound reflection came from the former head of the Luftwaffe Fehlerarm, General Lieutenant Adolf Galland, speaking decades later at a reunion. "We made a terrible mistake in 1943. We saw this big, heavy fighter and laughed. We were the ones who didn't understand. The Americans didn't try to build a European fighter. They built an American one, designed around production, firepower, and survivability." The first time I flew a captured P-47 after the war, I understood everything. The power was incredible. But what really impressed me was realizing that America built over 15,000 of these complex machines while fighting a two-ocean war. That's when I knew we never had a chance. Those guns, we called them Roosevelt's piano because of the sound they made. Once you heard that sound, you never forgot it. The P-47 didn't just defeat the Luftwaffe, it destroyed it. The P-47 Thunderbolt entered combat as an object of derision and exited as an instrument of annihilation. Its victory was a victory of brute force engineering, structural durability, and the simple, overwhelming material superiority of a free industrial power. The laughter died with the German aces, and the sky belonged to the thunder.